Okay, good morning. Being that today is Yud Gimel Iyar, and it's the yahrzeit, the 71st yahrzeit of the Rebbe's brother of Yisroel, Aryeh Leib. And we all know that his life is shrouded in a lot of mystery. And being that none of us met him, so it's all about stories, and I thought appropriate to learn with you actually something that the Rebbe spoke and wrote about his brother. So there are a number of times in the mems that the Rebbe did speak about him on Fabrengen, connected to Yud Gimel Iyar, and spoke about his name, Yisroel, Aryeh Leib, all referencing to the concept of his hapche, transformation, that all the names of his is about shiva and transforming darkness to light, which perhaps hints to part of what his life was like. But there's a reshima that the Rebbe actually spoke and then edited. In Tavshin Yud Gimel, after the Rebbe stood up from shiva, and Yud Iyar, Yud Gimel Iyar was the yahrzeit, and Yud Iyar, the day after Leib, so the Rebbe spoke a few words, which initially was written up in a ha'ara, in a footnote in Likutei Sichos Chelik Daled, but there it's more bekitzer. And here's the full reshima that was found afterwards, which the Rebbe then edited, and he basically wrote the whole thing from beginning to end, as I understand it. So it's quite a fascinating piece. Firstly, B'chlal on its own, it's a deep concept in Chassidus the Rebbe talks about. It's not long, but it can take long to learn. And secondly, it's interesting that it reflects, this is the Rebbe speaking, Mamish standing up from shiva for his own brother. So if anything is, I'm going to say everything. Tavshin Yud Beis, when he passed away. On the year when the Rebbe stood up shiva, Tavshin Yud Beis, 1952. And as I said, most fascinating is that this is probably the closest thing we have that's in print. It's actually written under the Rebbe, published, something for the public. So in a sense, if you want to ask the Rebbe, what does he say about his brother? There you have it. The Rebbe found this the most important thing to say right then when the Rebbe stood up from shiva. The stories about Rabbi Yisrael Leib and how the Rebbe protected his mother as much as possible are known, so I'm not going to go through all these vices. I thought appropriate to say the Chassidus, to learn the Chassidus with a lot of chidushim actually from the Rebbe all around his brother. So it's printed nowadays, it's printed in Likutei Sichos, they sophist, volume 27, Chelik Chav Zayin, volume 27, page 363. If you want to look it up, you can check it out. I'll read it inside. And if there's time that remains after this, I don't know if there'll be. I was going to talk about Leib, but we'll see. So the date of it is cited Yishmaya, Yud Iyar, Lamadal Le'emer Hey Tavshin Yud Beis, and I'm going to also learn it with the footnotes, because there's a lot of footnotes. So Yem Sim HaShiva La'achrei Havas V'chassid Yishyer Elikim Ubal Midas Yisrael Aryeh Leib Echov Shal Yivod L'chaim Tevim Kvei Dushas HaMushlita Reshimis HaShemim Be'esofis Ha'aretz La'achazman Mikvei Dushas HaMushlita. That's with a quotation. That means the Rebbe must have written that. So the Rebbe spoke, they wrote it down, and then the Rebbe added. As I said, my understanding, I think I asked Aryeh once, that the Rebbe basically rewrote the whole thing almost from beginning to end. And Chelik Gimel, I'm sorry, I said Chelik Daled before. Where's the original order where this is Bekitzer? It's in volume 3 in Likutei Sichos, page 976, order 19. Okay. And here's how it goes. Habriya hi yerida v'ishtalshus mamayl lamata. So the Rebbe begins the opening statement. that the Bria is essentially defining what means Bria when you say creation. It's essentially language of Chassidus, Yeridus v'Ishtalshlus. Yerid is a descent, Ishtalshlus is a evolution, if you wish, like a shalshelas. The harder he's going to explain the difference. V'mayla lamata. That's what creation is, because the Eibishter is the Chaboira, and from the Boira to become a Bria, it needs to go from one stage to another stage. As I pointed out many times, that the Eibishter wanted to create naifin of Seichel, not just Kol Yochel. So it's the Seder HaDrog, Yerida v'Ishtalshlus Mayla lamata. I'll do the Ha'aris right away. On the word Habriya, the Rebbe writes, V'gam Atzilus b'chlal. So even though the Chlolus is Bria, it also is Keil Atzilus. V'al derech Maimer Azal, Pekad Rebbe Lezer, Atzilei Nivra Eilam. So it says, we know Atzilei Nivra Eilam Hayahu Shmei Bolvad. So what does Eilam mean? Shapirushe Gam Atzilei Netzal. So in Avedis HaKedesh, she quotes here, Chelik HaYuchad Perek Beis, he makes it clear, Atzilei Nivra doesn't just mean Nivra, it means Atzilei Netzal also, meaning also prior to Atzilus. So what do we see from that? That sometimes Bria is a closed name on all the worlds, including Atzilus, even though when you break it down, Atzilus is Meloshen Hatzola, Netzal. Bria is Bria Yeshmayin. But we know that Chassidus explains, the Fierach in the beginning of Ayin Beis, in many places, that the Fierach Ein Sof, even Atzilus has an element of Bria. Yesh ma'ayin. Okay, so Gam Atzilus the Klolus. And this the Rebbe adds is also Atzilus the Klolus, which we know is Eirei and Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. The Rebbe tzeichel da Dibra Maschel Tzenen or Tov Reish Nun Dalet. Okay, so Habriya means everything now. Kol Seder Shtalshlus, even higher, even Atzilus the Klolus. Just briefly, what's the difference? We know that the whole world is Elam, Katan Zeodam, like microcosm, macrocosm. So just like there's Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, Deprotius in the language of Chassidus, which is usually the worlds that we talk about, there's also the Cholus, more macrocosm. So there's a maimer called Drush Gimel Mini Odom from the Alter Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek Sargos, it's printed in Eira Teiri in Yonim. He explains exactly what those four levels are. Just briefly, Atzilus, the Cholus, is Eirei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, the lower levels. We call Ezra Sfiris Hagnuzis, according to Chassidus. Where Shir Atzmei B'Keyach, Ola B'Ritzeinei, regarding vision's existence, Lifnei Tzimtzum. Malchus the Ein Sof is Malchus of that Atzilus the Klolus. When you hear language like Tiferes Hanelam, there are no Sfiris Lifnei Tzimtzum, as it says in Eitz Chaim, but there's the envisioning the Sfiris, so to speak. Bria the Klolus is Ak, Adam Kadman. Yitzir the Klolus, there's two ways it's explained. Sometimes explained it's Akudim and Nukudim, and sometimes it's explained that it's Keser, Atik and Arich. That's what Tzedek says that. And Asiya the Klolus, macrocosm, is Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiya the Protis. So, interesting, based on that, Atzilus the Protis is actually called Asiya, the Klolus. But regardless, all of this is encompassed in the word Habriya. And the word Yerida v'Ishtalshlus, the Rebbe says, what's the difference between Yerida and Ishtalshlus? So he says, Ishtalshlus ma Chochma ve'elach. So from Chochma and on, meaning from the first Sfira, and on is called Ishtalshlus. Yerida me'erein sof l'Chochma, which makes sense, because from Chochma to Bina to Das, etc., is a Ishtalshlus. It's ilav olul essentially. They're lefierech one another. Yerida indicates something more than just ishtalshlus. A shalshelas is a chain. A chain, every link is linked to another part of the chain. So chochma, bina, and so on, the spheres. Yerida is the leap, the jump, the paradigm shift from me'erin sof l'chochma. It's one way that Rebbe explains it. Another, b'chlolus yeser, more in general, hishtalshlus la'acharat tzimtzum, Yerida adat tzimtzum. So Ishtalshlus is going everything after the tzimtzum, which again, the Fierach is more Seder V'Adroga, and Lifnei tzimtzum is Yerida. Interesting, this I've not seen anywhere else in Chassidus describes those words, Yerida v'Ishtalshlus. And that's why the order is Yerida first, because first you have to go from Lifnei tzimtzum to Acharat tzimtzum, or from Lifnei HaChochme to Chochme. So it's Yerida v'Ishtalshlus. Ye'uyin Yitzechens L'kutei Torah Baruch Tzadik Hey Beis, and Shir Hashirim and Beis Beis, and also Geras HaKodesh Simon Chof. Okay. Weiter. So we've established that Bria existence essentially is a Yerida, from a higher level to a lower level. Yerida v'ishtalshlos, Mamayla Lamata, from the top down. V'hakavona, and what's the intention? Why did the Eibush to make this? Everything has to have a purpose. The purpose of it is that there should then be an aliyah, achar aliyah. In other words, we climb back. So if something comes downward, think of a ladder, you go down the ladder, and then the kavanah is that we should go back up. And being that this is the higher kavanah elyein, the so-called the divine intention or purpose, harinasa came bepale. Interesting. So the Rebbe is saying, it's not just the kavanah, in other words, like b'koyach, that actually is bepale. That existence consists of two things: the creation of ma'il lamata, the yirida v'ishtalsh ma'il lamata, and in existence is built in the potential, the possibility to climb back up. So it's not just basically by warning, it's not just that the Eibishter created the world and it's our Veda that climbs. Yes, it's our Veda that actualizes it. It's not going to happen on its own, but it's built in because that's the kavanah. The kavanah was not just to create, the kavanah was to be Eila as well. So in other words, every Yerida is built in the Aliyah within it, as the Rebbe is going to explain. So, even though again, he doesn't refer to his brother here, but you can see that's how the Rebbe is categorizing his life, as we'll soon see more details about that. Okay, in Ha'areh, and the words, Harinasa came bepale, so this is a longer Ha'areh, so I'll read it inside, and interesting Ha'areh, which needs its own iyun. So the Rebbe writes, Anasa came, again, the words are, because this is the kavanah al-yena, that's why it became bepale. That's an interesting expression, like Micah Mashmalan. So we know ein kayach chasar peil, but it's more than that. It's not just the Eibishter in his kayach, he has the mile of peil. He actually wanted it to happen this way, and it's critical, as we'll soon see, because that it's embedded in existence, not just the Yerida, but the Aliyah that comes through the Yerida. So the Rebbe says in the order, Nasa came bepeil, ke'ema akiv chaz v'shalom, b'yodeh. Because nothing stops the Eibishter. There's nothing that holds him back. Literally, it means ma'akav b'yodeh, no one can hold back his hand. Eibishter could do as he sees fit. It's an interesting expression, because usually you'd say the word kol yochel. They can do everything, but the Rebbe says, ke'ema ya'akav b'yodeh chaz v'shalom. So there's been pulim about it, and my thought why the Rebbe is using that expression is because the whole kavanah here is a chiddush here. Because you'd say, okay, mele the aliyah mamayla lamata that the Eibishter created, but that the yerida shalit aliyah, you could say that's avodas hatshuva. That's completely initiated by us. It's not the Eibishter wanted it that way. That's why it's not, some places it says it's not a mitzvah. That's why it's higher than Torah. Torah says, Adam Yasher Helach, follow Torah mitzvahs. The Eibishter opened up a door through tshuva. So you could argue that in the, like say, you know, ein katega nasa sanega, ein sanega nasa katega. You can't have the thing that, ein katega nasa sanega, sorry. So the cheder, you could say like echta v'ashuv. You can't say in the ched there's also a built-in aliyah. So it's a chiddush. So, but the Rebbe is saying ein ma'akav miyodeh, because even though seemingly, for example, if a human being, if you send someone on a mission and you have the purpose for them, you give them exact instructions, this is what you're supposed to do. Great, perfect. So built into the mission is all the keiches they have to fulfill it. What happens if they break, they are moel b'shluchusam? They don't follow your orders. So most likely you didn't do it, prepare for that. Because the whole premise is built on that they're following your orders. So to say built into the shlichus is also what to do afterwards, to turn the yerida into an aliyah, that's already the person's work. But he says, because the Eibishter is basically, there's not that, he could do that. He has the capacity to build into, even in the world, in the yerida, that the capacity to have the aliyah. And the Rebbe continues, Ubefrat, shekavonas abriya kedemes lebriya. And specifically, we can say this because kavana always precedes the action. First you have an intention, then you make the same thing here. The kavana of the bria preceded the bria. If the bria was created a certain way, you could say, you know what, light doesn't become darkness. Fire doesn't become water. But the kavana that preceded the Yerida Mamay Lamata preceded the bria of the worlds, that's Mamay Lamata. So since the kavana precedes it, Gam Latzilus the Klolis, like he said in the previous canal, in other words, the kavana precedes all existence, even Atzilus the Klolis, the highest worlds. And there, in the kavana, you don't even have Bapel Mamish, the world. So therefore there's no root or source. It says both Sherish Shemokir, Mitzia Sherish Shemokir Lulumazeh. Kimuva. So b'meila in the kavana, the Eibishter could plant in that whatever the Yerida will be, it will have that capacity, like he said, the kavana of it, because at this point, we're not talking about dealing with something negative. We're dealing with the kavana that says that whatever will happen in this Yerida, it's the kavana is to be Eilid. That's what he's saying here. That seems to be the Havana and the Befrat. As I said, this can be a whole discussion at length and many different ways to understand Pshat, but I'm just learning the most basic way to understand this. Come on. Then the Rebbe continues, this is all the harder. Valkain, Sarech Lemer, and here you see the Rebbe is already talking about the human being, not just the Kavana and the creation. Says that's why you have to say Shehapchira Negas Rak b'Matzovim Shel Protim. Okay, because here comes the big question. We know the Eibishter gave a human being free will. Free will means that you can choose, God forbid, to wander away and transgress and not follow the orders. In other words, the Eibishter created the Bria Mamay Lamata Take, Yerida Ishtalshus, like we discussed, but then something can happen. We can change the course of destiny. Everything else in this world is lemeshana tafkidam, the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. The sun, the moon, the animals, chayt, semeach, demim, don't have any choice. How they're created, that's how they'll be. If they're hunters, they'll be hunters. If they're prey, they're prey. They can't change their nature, they can't change anything. They're always fulfilling what God wants them to do. The human being can do something, God forbid, that goes against what the Eibishter wants. Moving could also do something and elevate the world beyond the kavan, beyond what's built in. In other words, we could take and reveal in the world higher levels of elikus. But since the bchira, so then it would seem then it's a statement what the Rebbe just said, l'cheira, because bchira is not nichla in the kavan elyon. The kavan is that there should be Yerida should come to Aliyah. That's built in, like the Rebbe said clearly. Mima akiv, or befrat that the kavana precedes existence. But once existence happens, what about bchira now? The Eibishter could not have built in the bchira into the kavana because that would take away our bchira. So the Rebbe says, based on this point, you have to say that bchira is not on the etzemiyin of aliyah. There's a big chidush here. It's only the matzovim of the protim. The details of how it will be fulfilled, that's what bchira accomplishes. But it does not change the sachakel. So let's say the sachakel is 100, whether you'll get there through 70 and 30, or 60 and 40, or it'll be 100 people that will bring you there, or one person, that is bchira. But the sachakel, the end result, is going to happen. No, it's had Adam and Chava not eaten from Eitz Hadas, so they would have brought Mashiach, but they did. So Mashiach is still going to come, but now you need more people to do it. And you need more Birurim. We discussed this in a previous shir. And you need people to travel all over the world. The end result will be Mashiach, the Sachakel. The Shlemus HaKavonos HaBriya will be fulfilled. And will be fulfilled in ways even higher than had they done it, as we discussed. But what is the difference is pratim. Will you be part of it? Will this detail be part of it? Will that detail be part of it? So this is an interesting take. You don't always hear this because everyone asks the question about Bechira, if Mashiach is going to come anyway, what difference does it make how we behave? Everybody's going to end up doing tshuva and everything's going to be perfect. So far, I'm not part of it. Or I'm not, like for example, let's say an army. The army is going to war, and you decide they're going to win the war anyway. Why do I have to wake up in the morning? I'll stay in bed, and they're going to win, and I'll come with the victory dance, But the answer is, but then you are not part of it. The Geula did not really penetrate you b'primis. Will you also be nigel? Yeah, but there's something that will be missing. And this again can be elaborated upon. I want to read the order, then I'll try to explain a little more. But that's what the Rebbe says, Klora de Burim. So the Rebbe, ad kedei kach, is Yerida Serech Aliyah, Yerida has the Kavon Aliyah, that Bechira is only regarding the protim, how it's going to happen, or who will be involved, or the details, but not the Sachakol. That will be fulfilled, because that's the Kavon of the Eibishter. And nothing can stop him. Maybe that's also why the Rebbe says, Mi Ma'akiv. Even Bechira Sa'odam can be Mailim Elikus, God forbid, can extend the goal of Zachman al-Islan, but it cannot stop the ultimate goal being reached, which is the Sachakol Shalabriya B'cholusa. Which is what? Shehi Ba'aliyah Tmidis. That the world is constantly in a state of aliyah. That Bechira cannot stop. So there can be dips and turns and twists and turns, but it cannot stop the general momentum of existence, B'riya, working toward aliyah, toward the Shleimus HaKavona. Kivan shekachu kavona sabreira. Shekachi kavona sabreira. Because that's the kavona. So in other words, the Eibishter created existence before we came into the picture. He built in that it's going to be Mashiach and Geula will be the end result. The Kavanah will be fulfilled. The question is, who will be involved and what details and how will it happen? That's in our power. Similar to what we say about Chet HaMeraglim. What was their Chet? They were sent there to scout out the land, and they came back with a bad report. Well, that's what you sent us for. You came us just to give you a good report. The answer is because they didn't just give a report. They didn't say, here are the challenges, and here are the Giberim, and the Anokim, the giants, and here they came back with a maskana. We can't do it. They entered into the domain that was not asked. We didn't ask you whether we can do it. We for sure can do it, because the Eibishter promised that they're going to go into Eretz Yisroel. That's not a shayla. You were sent to figure out how to do it. You go this way, that way, like the Ramban explains in the beginning of Shlach, Pasha Shlach. How to do it. It's a very big difference. You're sent how. No one asked you whether you should be born, or whether you should come to this world, or whether you should be given the shlichus. Your job is to figure out how. Because the shlichus is already instituted. The kavon is there. So the Bechira only affects, as he says, the protim. Because that's the kavona sabeira. The heart is not finished. Another part to it. The Rebbe goes be'emek yeser. Okay, I just want to add one thing to explain this a bit. I once saw something interesting. Nissim Mendel was the Rebbe's secretary for many years, Friedrich Rebbe. The Rebbe, he was essentially the writer in English. He also wrote the letters, Mechtavim Klom. The Rebbe would dictate to him answers. He was like the main correspondence secretary, if you wish. It was also, during his lifetime, Moshe Leib Rothstein, but he passed away in Ches, I think. And a few others, but he was the main person. So in his early years, he wrote a book called The Philosophy of Chabad. It was actually a dissertation, a doctorate that he wrote for his degree, becoming a professor, a doctor, whatever you want to call it. So he wrote The Philosophy of Chabad. The Rebbe edited it very heavily. It was in the early years. I think it was even before the Nesius, if I recall correctly. Yeah, probably in the Shins, like in the 40s. And the Rebbe edited it. When I was writing Torah Meaning for Life, I looked at it because I knew there was a lot of edits from the Rebbe, and I knew therefore it's accurate, everything is Reis Gehalten. So I looked to see if there's anything there I can use in explaining the Rebbe's ideas, Chassidus ideas. And I found something which I was sure there's no way that Nissim Mendel wrote this. So I called him, I asked him, and he told me, Taka, the Rebbe wrote that whole piece. and it's something that most people don't know about, but it's, when you read this, you see somewhat the same kivun, the same approach. The question there is, it's a lot around Tanya. What Tanya is, the whole book is around the meaning of Tanya. The question is, if Mashiach is going to come anyway, so what difference does it make if it comes a day before or a day later, like I said before? It's going to happen anyway. So why do we have to do anything? So there's different answers given for it. You know, like I said before, you're going to be part of it, so it's more of a gavra thing, not a chefza thing. No, the gula will happen, the chefza of gula. Whether you, the gavra, are going to be involved. Like I said, you could be sleeping when it happens, and then you're just going to go along for the Rebbe. But the Rebbe adds there, and he said the Rebbe wrote it in Hebrew, and he spelled it out in English, a fascinating point. He says, not only Mokim is in Golis, also Zman is in Golis. So if there's a second that remains, that Golis extends one more second, there's 1 second in history that will never have experienced Gula. Because remember, Zman doesn't just pass, yes, Avar, Heva, Asid. But yesterday, we're just not there anymore. That's why it says in Chassidus explains why you bottle Avar Zman, you bottle Karbone. Why can't you do a mitzvah today? If you missed yesterday at davening, or yesterday at Tefillin Chaz v'Shalom, why can't you put it on twice today? Because it's not just the mitzvah. It's the bir hazman, and the zman is no longer there. So zman is energy, bo by yomim, every day is called yom v'yom ovid avidah to the Zohar says. I'm elaborating a bit. So zman is also an entity. So just like mokim, if you're not mevar at every corner of the world, something is not mevurer. Same thing with Zman. So if Mashiach comes a day later, in a sense, a certain detail will never have been redeemed. That moment that remains left, locked, so to speak, in Golus. And since the Geula, you want it to be complete b'shleimus, that's why the earlier you bring it, the more bir haprate azman. Somewhat similar to what that means. Not mamish the same teichen, but the same word, but the same teichen. That it's the matzav apratim. The end of the day, yeah, Geula is going to come. The kavana will be eizgefit. But the question is the matzav apratim. Okay, let's continue the second half of the hara. Okay. Ube'emek yeser. The Rebbe continues, Be'emek yeser, to explain this idea, Bechira versus Yerida Tzedek Aliyah. Be'emek yeser, tzarech leimer, shegam be'ish haproti. Till now he said, matzovim haproti. What did he say before? Matzovim shal protim. You have to say that also the ish haproti, the individual, miskayem es kavonas habeira. So you could say, okay, the kavonas habeira will be fulfilled, but as I said, not everybody may be involved. If somebody, for example, dies, God forbid, and they didn't do tshuva, and then the Geula comes, you could say they in that seer that they were in are not going to be nigel. That's why we have Ein Lam Chelik Le'Lam Haba. As this explains, one of the explanations is in a Gilgal there'll be the Maraglim or the others that Ein Lam Chelik, they will have Elam Haba, but not their Tzir Hagov. The Rebbe explains this in Rishima and Chis HaMesim, a famous one, Shuvah Siburim. It's printed today in Igres Chelik Beis. But the Rebbe is going further now. No, even Isha Prati. Now you can imagine he's also talking, remember, about it's Rishima around his brother. So it's not just the Kavanah of it Eizgefid then. That the Kavanah will Eizgefid then also, the Isha Prati Miskayem es Kavanah Sabeira. Shehu Ba'aliyah Tmidis. Because since the Kavanah Sabeira, we said, is an Aliyah Tmidis, is built into the Bria. So even when there's a Yerida, there's Aliyah built into it. So it's not just Aliyah of the world, and the details is the difference, but also each Prati is ultimately also going to experience the Aliyah. The Maishna, because what's the difference? What's the difference if you're saying that the Kavanah Sabeira is always there? So what difference if we're talking about the Klal or the Prat? So you have to say that also the Prat, the individual, and therefore the beard is. And how do you explain it? Because the Kavanah essentially implants that there'll always be Aliyah, both in the Klolos Abriya and in the Pratim of the individual, meaning every person We say lo yidach mimenu yidach on everybody. Because the Eibishter's kavanah will ultimately lead that person. That's why the Rambam says that b'seif galusan Yisroel eisen tshuva miyad ein golem. Says it as a haftacha. I told him b'chira because the Eibishter planted that. That's what will be the case. So the Rebbe says, "Val korche chabir hu commission is b'ayre v'fnim." Okay, continuing the Aryeh. So then Eibazeh, what's the b'chira Adam then? If you say the pratim are not all Eila, like I said, with Zman, it's one thing. Now you're saying every individual, meaning even a Rasha, even a Baal Aveda. The Rebbe doesn't say those words, but someone who didn't do tshuva is also. So then what's the b'chira is what? So what's the b'chira Adam? Kevas mehirus aliyah. B'chira determines how fast aliyah will be. Will it be one day earlier or one day later? That is up to you. Like I said before, that is going to happen, it's going to happen. We'll reach the destination, the goal, the kavonas habriya. But the quickness, how fast, that's already up to b'chira. Val derech maimer azal, zochu, achisheno, lo zochu bi'ito. So basically, the Razal Sanhedrin says that zochu, should the people merit, so Mashiach will come b'achisheno, quicker. Why? Because our merits cause it to happen faster. Mihiras aliyah. Or leizachu, if we're not meriting, it will happen in its time. It will happen. It's the question of when. So here the Rebbe is being machadish that b'chira, before he spoke b'chira is only matzav apratim. Now he's saying b'chira is in the speed of how quick it's going to happen. Which somewhat also overlaps with what I said from the philosophy of Chabad, from the Rebbe's biur with Zman. Okay. Second thing, just see it. So one thing is that it's going to establish the speed of the aliyah, how fast it's going to happen, a day earlier, a day later. And also it's going to establish the manner of the aliyah. There are many ways you could be eila. You know, just like it says sometimes you could be eila with kavod, you can be eila with bizyanis. Either way you're going to get there, but so the Eifan Aliyah is also determined by B'chira. If it's in a way that's giving some room for L'umazeh, that of course is somebody who was involved in L'umazeh. And dafke through the L'umazeh, through so-called a yirida in his life, this person's life, he ultimately comes and conquers and completely transforms. So that's one way. Does he bring the other way? Or I'm just skipping a line, we're going to go back in a minute. Or the aliyah is without any retreat. In other words, there are two ways you can climb a mountain. You can climb straight up, perfect. Or you can climb and you can fall once or twice or go backwards or have a setback. You ultimately get there. Both of them will end up at the top. Well, the aliyah will happen. The question is, did it come through something negative that you conquered, or it was a constant forward progress? So somewhat the difference between a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva. So a tzaddik achieves the goal straight. A Baal Tshuva has setbacks, but through the setbacks it propels him forward. But I want to go back to what the Rebbe says, because he explains what means and here's a fascinating dugma the Rebbe brings. He just brings it with Aremes and Amaramokim. Al derech mashen is boyer b'sefer ha-mitzvus, mitzvus isur avedis balmum. Okay, so this is a maimer from the Alter Rebbe that the Tzemach Tzedek elaborates on in Derech Mitzvah. It's a very complex maimer, to be very honest, but I'll just give a summary of it. The big question the Alter Rebbe has, the Tzemach Tzedek asks, he's bringing Derech Mitzvah, so say Sefer HaMitzvahs, is what's wrong with a Balmum? The Eibishter created somebody with a handicap, God forbid, a scar in their eye, or another handicap. It's not their fault, they didn't do anything wrong. Or even if it's an injury that happens in the middle of their life, so suddenly they can't go be a servant in the Beis HaMikdash. Well, the Eibishter created everybody. I mean, think about it. It's like hepech everything we tell people. No matter what happened to you in your life, you always are connected to Hashem. You say somebody, God forbid, has an injury or has a handicap, a child born, Rahman al-Islam, not with the Down syndrome or something, so we say, no, you can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash. Well, the Eibush is concerned with what's wrong with a Baal Mum exactly. And then the question he asks is, so why can they eat, the din is, this Kohen Baal Mum could eat Truma. But Manavshach, if he's puzzled to serve Hashem, how could he eat Truma? It means he's still a Kohen. That's the question there in the Maimer. And he answers it with a very deep explanation. He gives a mashal. It's a very fascinating mashal. The Rebbe is referring to it here. That some neshamas come down to this world to be make a tikkun. Since after Chet Tzadas, the world is not perfect. So we have to correct it. So some people come down and they carry within them a handicap. They carry a mum. Not chaz v'shalom that they are being punished, but in a sense they are representing in that area a tikkun for Klal Yisrael, for the whole world. Serving the Beis HaMikdash, you need to have a dinya shel shleimus. Not because there's something chsarn in a Baal Mum, but shleimus is necessary in certain situations. So we're not talking about the person that is still a kohen. That's why he eats truma. But to serve in the Beis HaMikdash, you need to have all ramach evarim, all shasai gidim, a dover shalom. Just like the korban can be a mum. Everything is a dover shalom. But ultimately, why is this person a mum? Is because they are in some way protecting Klal Yisrael through their mum. And he gives an example. So this is the example. Something mitachsisem milchama. One of the strategies in war, when you're fighting an enemy, so I know there's a lot of strategies. Here's this strategy. Sometimes you don't know where the enemy is because they're hidden. They hide, and you want to draw them out. So how do you draw out an enemy without, So you send some of your soldiers out into the open field, so the enemy sees them, so the enemy starts shooting at them. It's like a decoy or like a way of drawing out the enemy. And they may fall, and they may die. But because of that, the other side knows where the enemy is, and therefore they can conquer them. So there was an esiga la'achad, there was a negative experience, but the kavanah is a positive one. So the Rebbe is bringing that as a dugma, that the bechira can cause two ways. It could be, if it's a bad bechira, it could be that even though there was a setback, like in this case, that this person is falling, this person became like I don't say a sel azazel, but he became like the person who was a casualty. But because of that, he saved the rest of Klal Yisrael, the rest of the army, the military. So the Rebbe is saying that, so that's one type of aliyah. The other we're going to learn again is going straight. That's the Rebbe gives the dugma. So it's interesting. In other words, the Rebbe is in a way explaining that a person, sometimes you see someone live their life and doesn't seem like they're living the way Torah Mitzvahs wants you to be on the highest level. Don't be careful before you judge. You never know why certain people have these challenges. Say Bazeh becomes the shaila, so what's what happened with Bchira? You said it's Bchira. Here you're basically justifying that if a person does a sin, maybe they're that Baal Mum that is essentially giving of themselves in order to save the rest of the people. So the Rebbe doesn't stop here. He says, and this doesn't mean that you're off the hook. The boicher that chose to do something wrong is still going to be nenash. Because that's not his kavanah. When a person sins, it's because he gave them to the Yetzer Hara. It's not he's sinning in order to represent all the sinners so that they should all be elevated, like in the mashal with the military. That's what the Rebbe says. Which is very, very interesting, like echte v'ashuv. You can't say echte v'ashuv because you ain't going to take a nas saneger, and that's that. You'll say, you know what? Since tshuva, so we can do whatever we want. We'll do an avera, then we'll do tshuva. That doesn't work that way. I'm not talking about im dochak v'nichnas because that's tshuva on that avera itself of echte v'ashuv. But point being here is that's what the Rebbe says. That's one way the aliyah happens. Or the aliyah is without any retreat backwards, like in the first way we just discussed. So what do you see now? Number one, Bechira deals with time, whether it'll be earlier or later. And the second thing, Bechira, is regarding the Eifen Haliyah. Will it be a straight, like a tzaddik, who's always doing the right thing? Or will it be with setbacks, like we just explained, and the Derech Mitzvah Sefer HaMitzvahs explains one example for that. It's all still in the Ha'ara. V'hine, V'hu me'ein achilik di Yerushalmi or Bavli. That's similar to the difference between Yerushalmi and Bavli. She'af she'kol kushya hu mesitr dara. Even though every kashya, like in Talmud Bavli, comes from sitr dara, like he explains in the Geras HaKedesh, Simon Chavov. Aval gam hi misayes lebirir hadin. But also the question also helps to clarify the din. So you see in Torah itself, Yerushalmi is more like Yashar, the Aliyah goes direct, and Bavli is through questions, but the questions themselves bring you to the Aliyah, to the clarity of din. That's how the Rebbe explains this piece here. And we just only finished 3 lines. Okay? Well, let's continue. I'll try to, it's pretty long actually, now that I realize. Maybe what I'll do is next week I'll continue, why not? It's an interesting, so you see here a very deep sugya. Okay, so then the Rebbe says, that's the Ha'ara. So B'meila, the Kavon Hanasa came b'peil. So in other words, I should correct something I said earlier. I said earlier that it's not just B'keach, the Kavon Elyena, it also comes, it's embedded in the Bria. It's more than that. The Rebbe is saying that since the Kavon Elyena is Aliyah, so the Aliyah will happen, no matter what. That's really the point. More than just, it's embedded in the Bria. That's also true. But it will happen, and that's why comes this long Ha'ara, Ke'em Akiv. Because who stops the Eibishter? The Eibishter is ultimately in control. If his Kavona is that there'll be Aliyah, nobody can override that. I Bechira, so to sum up, Bechira is only regarding the Protim, or regarding the Eifen Aliyah. Will it happen quicker or slower? Or is what way we're going to achieve the Aliyah? Through Cheshach or directly to Eir, as the Rebbe Berel said in different aces. Then he goes on, Shema'oz nigmar ha'yirida hischila Aliyah achar Aliyah. From the time that the Yerida stopped, and remember the Yerida, as we said before, Yerida v'ishtalshlus is the creation. So the moment creation happened, the Aliyah began. So why don't you see it in the world? And you see it opposite. You see, for example, Adam Arishan was Chet Adam Arishan, and it caused Stalkos Hashchina, as the Medrash Shir Hashirim Rabbah brings that he cites in Bas Lagani. So for the Aliyah, should have been an Aliyah right away. So he says no. Begoli, you see this in the Shamas and Gan Eden. Ubitzadikim gam be'elam haza, and tzadikim also in this world. Ukamayim Razal asher tamid chachomim hinehein be'elam hazeh vehein be'elam haba ein lehem menucha kehilchem heim b'chayil el chayil. So in other words, since the kavanah of the Eibush is Aliyah, so right after the creation is created, it begins Aliyah achar Aliyah. However, you don't see it begoli, only in the Shamas Gan Eden or in this world by tzadikim. And you see, Yelchem b'chayil el chayil means Aliyah achar Aliyah. So you see it actually in this world. By others you don't, so the Ha'ara already bavon, because others is a different way. The Aliyah will happen through the Yerida, through a Yerida, through a setback, as we discussed, Nasig la'achir, through a retreat. 2 Ha'aras here. Shma'oz nigmar ha'Yerida, the Rebbe writes, B'seif Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, Hischila ha'Aliyah, Ve'yechul ha'Shamayim. So you see it in the Pasuk, that right after Sheshis Yemei Bereshis, which is the Briyas ha'Elam, Hischil Aliyah, the Rebbe emphasized, Hischil the Aliyah began. Vayichul HaShamayim, Shabbos came. Vayichulu is an union of Aliyah. V'rei Geras HaKedesh Simin Yudalad, B'chol Yem V'yem Nimshachem Mechen El Yenim Yeser. The Geras HaKedesh says, every day I transmitted new levels, higher levels of Mechen. K'vein Yeser, Sh'lo Yohay Meir Adayim Yimei Elam Eir Elyon Kazeh. Unprecedented energy that never shined before, never radiated before. Ayin Sham. So what do you see from this? That Geras HaKedesh makes it very clear. Every day, from the beginning of the Bria, After the Bria is finished, the Aliyahs begin. And the words, Ein la menucha, the Rebbe says, Ein la menucha machalocha, mezem muchach shalihi gam ken tmidis, ene pesekes. Because where do you have the Aryeh? That's all the time. You could say the Aliyah happens, but maybe it's not, maybe it's intermittent. It says, no, from this we know, because it says, Ein la menucha, hein be'el haba, because it's a constant process. So from this is mucha that the Aliyah is tmidis, the Aliyah gam ken tmidis is ongoing, ene pesekes, never stops. So that's an additional kvetch that the Aliyah is an ongoing thing. Okay, I'm going to stop after this paragraph. A few more. I think we'll continue next week. Why not? This is a good topic. We have the next week, there's a share, yeah? Okay, we'll stop here. Everyone have a very good day. The Rebbe say,